Hey everybody, can you just go like that just a little bit with the screen? Hey everybody, welcome, wonderful to see you. Well, I thought what we would do today is we would read some Shakespeare. That's, for whatever reason, I didn't grow up reading Shakespeare. I mean, maybe. I seem to recall having to read some Shakespeare in a high school something class. But it wasn't like it was I didn't grow up reading poetry. Shakespeare is so famous in English literature that he's known as, anybody know what Shakespeare is known as? He's known as the Bard. People know what a bard is? A bard was a musician who would travel. So he was an itinerant, traveling minstrel, who was also wise and also gave instruction. So he was almost like a wandering guru who also sang and would visit the courts of kings and give instruction. In literature, or even in Jungian psychology, there's a special guru figure. Even the court jester also sometimes played this type of a role. There's a little bit of overlap because the court jester, being a comedian, was allowed to sometimes poke fun at the king without fear of getting his head cut off. And so he would be able to give sometimes good instruction to the king because his position as a comedian allowed him that kind of access. He could roast the king. The bard traditionally wasn't quite the court jester, but he was more like like how people might traditionally think of a wandering yogi, or Narad Muni, if you're really familiar with all the devotees who are born devotees and immediately nod their heads. Narad Muni in Indian literature, in our sacred text, is the classic archetype of a bard. If you look at the monomyth, there's a place for a guru who gives instruction to the hero on his journey and challenges the hero and equips him with knowledge or weapons that he must use to defeat the monster in the abyss and come out the other side transformed and having made the world a better place. So Shakespeare is so famous in English literature that he's known just as the Bard. Every poet wants to be a bard, but he's so famous, his name he just was known by that. There's a guy named Paul Rogers. Anybody know who Paul Rogers is? A singer? Oh, God. Yeah, one person knows. There's a band called Bad Company, like a well-known rock band of the 70s and kind of 80s. It was the first band that when Led Zeppelin made a label called Swan Song, the first band they signed was Bad Company. The lead singer of Bad Company was Paul Rogers. He's a white English kid, but he had like this smooth, bluesy voice that was, generally speaking, I mean, there was a whole bunch of guys like this in the 60s and 70s. But Paul Rogers was like who had this voice that sounded like almost, it was like a voice that was really associated with like soul and black music and gospel. But somehow as the rock and roll musicians stole rhythm and blues and electrified it, turned it into hard rock, they also forayed into adopting and imitating the voice of these rhythm and blues singers. And Paul Rodgers was like, he was an incredible singer. And he's known in the music industry as, anybody know? Huh? Now he knows the voice. That's like, oh, we got the voice singing for us. That's like the guy's so famous and he's so good and everybody wanted him so badly that he's known as the voice. That's how good he is. He was solicited by 10 different bands to sing for them. I think he even did a stint with Queen at one point. Like after Freddie Mercury died. He's just that good. But maybe not. I might be. Anyway, I'm not going to get into a whole musical history thing. That's not today's class. But you get these people, they're just so good at what they do that their name becomes synonymous with the thing they do. And we don't know this, but you know like you say, hey, you wear your heart on your sleeve? That's Shakespeare. In gratitude, thou iron-hearted fiend, Shakespeare. Hell hath no wrath like a woman scorned, Shakespeare. All's well that ends well, Shakespeare. So many cliche, colloquialisms and standard phrases that exemplify shared ideas about the nature of reality and common experiences in English that you know were written by Shakespeare. So he's got a famous monologue in one of his plays called The Quality of Mercy. Any of you guys familiar with it? The Merchant of Venice is about an heiress named Portia who they're like choosing her husband. There's these 3 caskets and you got to choose. And one of them's got silver, one of them's got lead, one of them's got gold. If you choose the right one, there's a picture of her in it, and then you get married to her. If you choose the wrong one, you don't get to get married, and you're banished from the kingdom. And it takes place in Venice. So there's a bunch of guys who are lusty or greedy, and they try, and they just can't choose the right one. And she picks this guy who's just a simple guy, simple, pious merchant, whose name is, I think, Benicio or something like that. It's probably a name on goodness. It's probably a play on the Latin word for goodness, where you get the word bueno from. His Bonissimo, I can't remember his name. Anyway, his buddy Antonio is in trouble. He's borrowing money from Shylock, the Jew, who's a moneylender. You know, moneylenders in traditional society are looked down upon. They're rich and they lend money to poor people at high rates of interest. It's called usury. It's illegal in this country. There's a certain rate of interest that you're not allowed to charge above. Apparently, you know that the girl Ashley Babbitt who got shot in the neck at the Capitol riot? She owned a pool cleaning business in Northern California. She went upside down. She had to borrow money. And I think the rate that she was lent money at was 170%, which is usurious. It's illegal. Now you can charge people, you can charge them a flat fee for borrowing money, but you can't, I think the highest rate you can charge is like 29 or 30% per year. That's why credit cards max out at that. And even if you go to pawn stuff off, like when I first came to Laguna, I pawned my wife's wedding jewelry multiple times to pay down the mortgage. I always managed to buy it back. Had a Rolex watch, I had to pawn that off to pay the mortgage too. I managed to buy that back as well. That was a whole story. Somehow, anyway, I don't know if I'm going to tell that story. I'll tell that story some other day. But, you know, they're only allowed to charge you a certain amount of interest on your thing because the law prevents them from charging more. Because when you start to get into compound interest and interest over time, I mean, like when you get a mortgage for $1 million on a house or something like that, for the first 10 years, you're just paying interest and like this much principal. And then in the last couple of years, you pay off the loan. But by the time you check out the amortization and the amount of interest you've paid, you'll have paid 3 or 4 times the value of the house, 5 times the value of the house in a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, right? Yeah. It's unbelievable how much they get you for. But we're just, we're used to buying things on credit and just paying it off over time. But you don't realize the guys who are lending you that money over time are getting filthy rich off you. The word mortgage means a death payment. Mortuis, mortuary. It means you have to pay it until you die. That's where the word comes from. So anyway, Jewish people, and there's also a class called Suvarnavaniks, or the gold merchants in India. And they were also looked down upon. And Nityananda Prabhu was famous because he preached even to the Suvarnavaniks. He preached even to the gold merchants, the people who lent money in traditional Indian society. They were looked down upon, and so usually Brahmins didn't go and eat at their homes, didn't go and preach to them because they were considered contaminated. We've all vowed to follow the 4 regular principles: no illicit sex, no intoxication, no meeting, no gambling. That's not part of a traditional vow you take when you get initiated, because it's assumed you're following those things. Otherwise, why would you seek initiation? It's like, we don't say you can't drink out of a toilet once you're initiated. It's just assumed that that there's certain things you don't do. And so people of the, just decent human society, it wasn't even a question that they would eat meat or take alcohol or engage in sex outside of marriage that wasn't for procreation, or gamble. So those vows were added by Prabhupada. He pulled them from the Bhagavatam because Kali took shelter of 4 places. Kali was given shelter. Parikshit Maharaj banished Kali. Kali was only allowed to be in 4 places where people ate meat, which destroys the quality of mercy, where they took intoxication, which destroys the quality of
trust.
Huh?
You can trust them.
There's honesty, mercy. What is it? I'm too lost in the 4 places destroy the 4 legs of Dharma in Kali Yuga, but now I'm lost on them. And so I'm feeling tempted to look them up. Narayan, do me a favor while I'm waxing eloquent. Go on the Veda base or something. Look up 4 qualities, Kali, 4 sinful acts. Do some kind of Boolean search, figure it out for me, and then write it to me in the thing in the next 2 minutes or so. Thank you very much, Prabhu. If you eat meat, then there's no mercy there. If you take intoxication, I think it's honesty, no truth. Truth is another leg of Dharma. I'm saying honesty, but it's truth. Because when you get intoxicated, you start to lie. And then there's gambling, and then there's illicit sex, and they each destroy one of the legs of Dharma. And so Parikshit Maharaj said, you're destroying Dharma. And so we have to save Dharma, which was represented as a cow, from this evil being who was beating this cow of Dharma and breaking her legs, cutting off her legs. And so Parikshit Maharaj when he was banishing Kali, kind of quarrel and strife, everything bad, almost like Pandora's box or something like that, all the bad stuff that comes out. Then he said, you can stay the lady doth protesteth too much, methinks. That's the exact line. You ever heard that one? The lady doth protesteth too much, methinks. That's Shakespeare. Narayan quoted that earlier. Meaning that you're arguing for your innocence too much. I think that means you're guilty. I love to quote that to people in a debate. Once I've got them on the ropes and they start to come up with less and less tenable arguments, and they're just kind of reaching for straws, I'll throw that one out at them. And it usually is a coup de grace. It's a final blow. So Pariksha Maharaj says you can stay in 4 places where people eat meat, have illicit sex, take intoxication, or gamble. And then he says, and you can stay where people hoard gold. And so people who hoard gold, people who are too attached to wealth, we consider them to be in the same category. Our archetypal demon, the archetypal antagonist to Krishna, is named Hiranyakashipu. Hiranya means gold. Suvarna also means gold. The Suvarna Vanings for gold merchants. And so Hiranyakashipu. Hiranya means gold. Kashipu means soft bed. And so Hiranyakashipu's name literally means gold and soft beds. Because the archetypal demon in our tradition, the archetypal antagonist, was attached to money and sex. Soft bed is a euphemism for sex. Thank you, Narayanji. When you do gambling, then honesty. When you take intoxication, it's austerity. And then in illicit sex, you lose cleanliness. And then in the slaughtering of animals, you lose mercy. When you kill animals, you lose mercy. When you gamble, you lie. When you're too attached to sex, you become impure. And when you take intoxication, you don't learn to live with integrity. It's so indulgent that you lose your ability to have integrity. And these are the 4 principles of Dharma. The willingness to perform austerities or perform some difficulty for the sake of upliftment, to stay pure, to be honest, and honest, austere, pure, and merciful. These are the 4 pillars of Dharma, the 4 legs of Dharma that Dharma stands on. And they get eroded away until by the age of Kali, the only one left is honesty. Prabhupada used to say, if you ask someone what time it is, they'll tell you. They will just lie to you for no purpose. And so, but when you hoard gold, when you get too attached to money, that also brings in all this negativity and begins to erode away at all these qualities. It's such a different culture. It's such a different culture. It's like we used to judge somebody by who they were. Then we started judging people by what they have. It used to be you judge people by who they are. I still do this. I judge people by who they are. I didn't join the Hare Krishnas to become impressed by material things. But societally, we used to judge people for their integrity. We should still do that. But then we started judging people by what they have. And then it got even worse. We started judging people by what they appear to have. That's now. It's like all hat, no cattle. If you look good on Instagram, then that means you're living your best life. It's about appearances. We used to judge people by what they have, but now it doesn't matter what you have. It just matters what you appear to have. Think about it. Sometimes people DM me when I post something. And I was just writing this. Somebody asked me, they asked me some intricate question. I'm supposed to write back to them. It's just texting is such a poor medium for deep communication. It's designed to just let you kind of drivel and then just quickly send it and then add afterthoughts. And pretty soon you're like adding afterthoughts and it doesn't even make sense. And then I'm just like, okay, call me. It's like too much. I mean, I'm getting better at it as a medium, but as a medium for communication. But I was just writing to somebody today. They asked me some intricate question. And it was just, I was trying to explain something to them, the difference between details and principles and how to tell the difference and how culture isn't always a detail and sometimes it represents a principle with examples. Anyway, it was a whole thing. You texted me to ask me to define prem, Krishna prem, what do you call love of God? And like it's Krishna prem, and it's defined in a multitude of different ways. It's sneha, man, pranaya, rag, anurag, bhav, mahabhav, and then mahabhav has 4 types: rud, adhi, rud, modanakya, madanakya. And then prem has a general definition, and each of those terms has a definition, and that's how we define love of God. Then you asked me something about like, well, is material love just chemicals? And I started explaining to you, no, material love is dependent on consciousness. Consciousness is a spiritual phenomenon. Therefore, everything is a spiritual phenomenon. Every emotion you feel is ultimately a spiritual phenomenon. And then I had to include that like hatred would also be in the same category, but those things are perverted and directed in the wrong way. And it was a whole complicated thing. At several points I almost thought, let me just tell you to call me. Everything's dumbed down. It's like 280 characters. You got a tweet. The guy from Twitter just wrote defending himself why they banned Trump today. Because Europe's getting all pissed off they banned Trump. Like the German government. Not because they think it's wrong to ban people. Not because they think it's wrong to ban people. It's illegal to do a Holocaust denial in Germany. Up to $50 million you could be fined by the government for publishing Holocaust denial. And so they're all over Twitter's case to ban the things they have decided as a government are important. They don't want private industry to decide it. They want the government to decide it because they're a socialist country. So they're not against censoring. They're against an individual being able to take a significant bite out of somebody's free speech without the government giving them the okay. You follow? Anyway, but the European Union, there's so many different countries. They got a debate about it for 50 years. They can't move. Twitter's able to move quick. They have this legislation they want to pass where they can take 6% of your income away if you don't follow their rules, but they can't agree on what those rules are, and so Twitter's just doing its thing. So anyway, the guy in charge of Twitter, Jack, whatever his name is, the weird dude with the beard and the Jack Dorsey with the nose ring, looks like the ultimate hipster. Except for he's like a multi-billionaire. He had to write explaining why they banned Trump, and it took him 13 tweets to do so because he only gets 280 characters every time. He wanted to write 600 words, and so it was 13 tweets. I don't know how I got off on that tangent. Huh? Oh, it's just a poor form of communication. It's just the way. So it's indicative of how we judge people by how you appear. Everything's just getting more and more shallow. Everything gets more and more shallow. Less and less words, more and more emojis, quicker communication. Mark Twain is famous for saying, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. Short, concise communication takes incredible effort. If you really want to make it. I mean, I used to write. I haven't written anything except for my signature in years. I don't write ever with my hand. But I used to write papers for school. And you would have like a whole notebook, and you would have a rough draft, and you'd move paragraphs around. It was a whole thing. And then you would finally get out a typewriter and meticulously type it in. And then they came out with typewriters that had the erase feature. And that was like a blessing. You could erase like one letter. So if you wrote like the wrong word, you could erase it very carefully. You have to like turn this thing, and it would press all the letters, and it would erase it, and then you could type over it. Previous to that, you had to cross it out, and then write it in above, and you keep typing. It was a whole thing. The world's changed so much. We used to care who you were, then we started caring what you have, then we started caring how you appear. It's the shallowness, It's the dumbing down of a culture. It's the erosion of integrity. The erosion of virtue. So anyway, I don't remember how I got into that. I mean, it was something with Kali and the erosion of these things and the way the world's going, and I gave you a modern day equivalent of it. But Shylock the Jew, the Jewish people, were traditionally moneylenders. They traditionally controlled banks and lent money, and it was a thing enough that Shylock the Jew, remember the whole a pound of flesh. That's from the Merchant of Venice. Antonio, the husband-to-be of the protagonist, gets into trouble with Shylock the Jew, takes him to court and demands a pound of flesh. And then Portia disguises herself as a lawyer and gives a speech to defend this guy Antonio who gets in trouble. And that's the speech, is this monologue about the quality of mercy. That's the background of the story. And she wins. And it's heavy. My guru, one of my gurus, Giriraj Swami, my Shiksha guru, he introduced me to this. I'd never seen it before. He introduced me to this. And so I thought to share it with you guys. I probably wouldn't do this in a Sunday class in Laguna or something like that, but I feel a little more free here in Long Beach to speak whatever I'm thinking about. All right, here we go. So here's the speech, and I thought I would just do a running commentary on the speech and give some corollaries, see how far we get. But did you guys get this so far? The Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare's play, How Much We Owe to the Bard, Paul Rogers as the voice. These guys are the archetypal thing. So much of how we think and the things we say come from Shakespeare. This quality of mercy is a monologue. It's Shakespeare teaching as a bard, something about how he views the world. The basic structure of the play is there's this woman, she's in love with a guy, he's a simple guy, and they're surrounded by aristocrats who are all deceitful, awful people, and one of these simple people gets in trouble with a usurious moneylender who wants his pound of flesh. They go to court, and the quality of mercy is introduced as a speech as part of that defense by our protagonist, who's a woman, and her name is Portia. Do you guys follow that? Portia, not Porsche like the car. Pronounced the same, but the word is Portia, pronounced Portia. Do you guys follow this? Okay. And I was just pointing out that this mercy is an important quality in our tradition. I gave it as the last leg of Dharma, and how mercy is destroyed. And the four regulative principles are designed to create mercy, austerity, cleanliness, and honesty. And when the four regulative principles are broken, those virtues can't stand. And so we actually want to develop positive virtues, and those virtues have antagonists. And so our following of the four regs is so that we can, in a strong way, develop those virtues. And those virtues also require us to not be greedy. And this whole idea of greed and gold, in many traditional cultures, people who are really greedy and hoarded money were looked down upon. And our culture is one of them. And you find the same thing in Shakespeare's time. Because when you're too attached to wealth, it starts to erode away at these fine qualities. And it's almost like another regulative principle. That's why we give charity, actually. Do you guys follow all that? All right, I think that's enough background, and we can move forward. Thank you again, Narayan, for helping out. I appreciate that very much. You're like my pundit. I appreciate that. The quality of mercy is not strained. The quality of mercy is not strained. Krishna says that if you give charity in the mode of passion, if you give charity and it makes you resentful, it's in the mode of passion. I a lot of times tell people you should give enough that it hurts a little bit, but not enough that it like really bums you out. Like, I don't recommend you go and pawn off your jewelry to pay the temple's mortgage. It's like, for me that was cool. That's within my wheelhouse. I'm okay with that. That wasn't strain. That wasn't a strain for me. You follow? Does that make sense? Like, I'm a pro, so I can play hurt. It doesn't strain me. But for most people, they'd resent the temple forever for doing something like that. So they shouldn't do that. It depends on who you are, what you can get away with. So, like Clint Eastwood said, a man has to know his limitations. That's Dirty Harry, a famous line from Dirty Harry, which probably is before all of your times. But anyway, there it is. The quality of mercy is not strained, meaning that the nature of mercy is that it's freely given, and it's munificent, and it's beautiful, and it's cloud-like, and it's soft and sweet. Here's his attempt to give you an analogy or a metaphor to really communicate what he means when he says the quality of mercy isn't strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven on the place beneath. So mercy is like rain coming from above. All right, a gentle rain. May the rain fall softly on your fields. It's a Gaelic benediction. It rains at night on your crops, and you wake up and your crops are watered and you get to live. You know, if it rains in the morning and then we have your wedding in the late morning, that would be ideal. We've got this whole thing going with Nandini, whose wedding is next week, because it's like Friday it rains and Saturday it's good. Now Friday and Saturday it rains. Her wedding on Saturday. Then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday it rains. And Sunday it's not raining. Then Friday it's not raining. It's still always on Saturday it's raining. And it's 30%. Now it's 40%. Now it's 50%. And we're just like, so we just can't win, you know? And it's like 75 degrees every day up until her wedding. And it's like 40 degrees. And we're just like... And it keeps changing multiple times a day. Sometimes every hour. She'll send me something, and an hour later it's different. I'll send it back to her, and we're just tossing it around. We're just going to depend on Krishna. Rain is a good thing. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. That's foreshadowing. The idea of mercy coming from heaven is foreshadowing. It's where you introduce an idea in a very subtle way, and you're opening stanzas, and then you develop it later on. It's a technique that people use in dramatic presentations where they want to build, they seed their ideas into the ground so they can blossom over the course of the discussion. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. Mercy is from one above to one below. It's somebody's in a superior position, then they're able to be merciful. The very nature of mercy is that somebody is in a position to be unusually kind to you in a way you couldn't be to yourself, and do something for you you couldn't do for yourself, and therefore in that relationship they're above you and they're giving you a gift like rain from heaven. You follow? It's beautiful already, isn't it? It just gets better. It is twice blessed. What's twice blessed? Huh? Mercy. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. Mercy is a blessing for you. When you go above and beyond and help somebody selflessly, you're blessed by that act. It's the opposite of sinful activities. It gives virtue. It rewards you. People don't understand this anymore. It's the road less traveled. It's a higher way of living. It's a more beautiful way of living. It's a subtler pleasure, but it's a divine pleasure. Being merciful, being kind, going above and beyond, forgiving, being quick to forgive. You're blessed by that. And the person you forgive is also benefited. You following this? You really want to interrupt me right now?
I was just going to ask if you could repeat that about giving easily.
Don't do that, man. Control your mind. We should be quick to forgive. You can let go of somebody. You can move on. You don't need to hold on to the resentment to do that. Forgive them and move on. Forgiveness isn't the same thing as a reconciliation. We have to move forward in life. Being merciful, being kind is essential to having communion with Krishna, to having communion with God. Because mercy is the nature of divinity, and if you want to come in the presence of the divine, you have to become merciful. And the way that manifests for most of us is by being forgiving, by letting things go, by letting go of resentment. There's more. "'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown." It's the mightiest thing in a culture like Shakespeare's time. The crown, the king, his scepter. These were the biggest, symbols of power, and they were the highest thing. He's saying it's mightier than the mightiest. You follow? What's mightier than the mightiest? Mercy. It's the throne monarch better than his crown. It's the ultimate symbol of power and goodness. It's the highest thing. His scepter shows the force of temporal power. Whose scepter shows the force of temporal power? The king's. The attribute to awe and majesty. The word "to" here is used to mean of. The attribute of awe and majesty. The king has a scepter, and he has power, and he commands awe and majesty. But what really does the king command? How do people really feel towards the king? No. They feel fear. That's right. The attribute of awe and mercy, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. Awe and mercy ultimately distills down to fear and dread. And so the power and the might and the crown and the scepter and the throne of the king and the strength commands fear. You follow? But mercy is above this sceptered sway. It's enthroned in the hearts of kings. It's an attribute to God himself. If you're on a throne, you should enthrone mercy in your heart as what you aspire to and what you worship, because mercy is a quality of God himself. Therefore, it fall like the gentle rain from heaven, because it is actually divine and it's the nature of divinity. And therefore, when we embody mercy within this world, we're coming closer to divinity, which is why it rewards the person who practices it. You guys following this? That's the foreshadowing of the rain from heaven, because mercy is actually divine. Mercy comes from merces. It means reward, but it ultimately, it means pity. And so that's where the word comes from, merci in French, which means pity. The word pity is cognate to the word piety, by the way. And so piety, pity, mercy, they all communicate the same thing. This is a whole other thing. We have a whole language for this, quite detailed in English. Empathy is when you feel... Pity is when you see somebody suffering and you feel bad for them, but you don't necessarily do anything about it. Sympathy takes it a step further. Pathos means feel. And so sympathy means you feel with somebody. So they're suffering and I feel bad that you're suffering and I want to do something to mitigate your suffering. But I might not know what to do, because I just come up with ideas, but I don't know how you feel. I just see you suffering and I feel that with you, and so I want to do something to mitigate it. But I don't know what you need necessarily. So above empathy is sympathy. Above pity is sympathy, because you do something about it. But above sympathy sometimes is empathy, and that's feeling into somebody. That's when I walk a mile in your shoes. Rabbi Twersky speaks about this. He speaks about a Reb, a Jewish rabbi, who had his acolyte, his servant, with him. And he was sitting down and he was meeting with people and they were talking about the problems. And the servant noticed, the young rabbi in training, that the older rabbi was sweating. He's like, "Why are you sweating?" He's like, "I'm working really hard." He goes, "But you're just sitting here listening to people." He goes, "No, I'm not." So every time somebody comes in, I take off my clothes and put on their clothes, so I understand what they're going through. But if I just put on their clothes, then I'm stuck in the same boat they're in. So I take off their clothes and put my clothes back on so I can help guide them out of it. And so I'm taking off my clothes, putting their clothes on, taking off their clothes, putting my clothes on all day, and I'm exhausted because I'm doing all this work. Rabbi Twersky is a full-on Orthodox Jewish rabbi. He's like an old, long, white beard, old man. And he also has a PhD in psychology, psychiatry probably. He's far out, like that really nice place where academia and spirituality meet together. So then there's empathy, but empathy, just feeling what somebody goes through, doesn't necessarily mean that you want to help them. You could find out how they're feeling and then use it against them. You've heard people say, "I'm an empath"? That's from a 1968 episode of Star Trek called The Empath. That's where that term comes from. That was based on a 1958 sci-fi book, but that's where it got popularized. So people are like, "I'm an empath." You go, "Oh, your religion is like Star Trek. That's your thing? You're a Trekkie." I won't go through the plot of that episode, but anyway, that's where empath comes from. It's an attribute of God himself. "And earthly power doth then show likest gods." When you are merciful, then your power in this world becomes divine. And the influence you wield in this world becomes divine because you are participating in the nature of divinity. When mercy seasons justice, that line itself, mercy seasons justice. It cures it. It matures it. It develops it, progresses it, refines it. When mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this. So he's asking the moneylender who wants his pound of flesh to be merciful. You follow? And he's saying, I acknowledge you have this earthly power, but if you were merciful, that would be like even better. It's rhetoric. She's trying to persuade the court. I'm part Jewish, and obviously not all Jewish people are moneylenders, and not all Jewish people are dispossessed of mercy. And so, although they might have had that job description, there's also the Suvarnavani community, which was frowned upon in Vedic culture, in medieval Bengali culture, but Nityananda Prabhu, bless them. Prabhupada was from that community. Same community that Prabhupada was born into. The Day community, the Datta community, they were the Kayasa community, they were of the same class, the Suvarnavani class. And Nityananda Prabhu showered them with mercy. And Prabhupada, of course, was Nityananda's primary and most prolific ambassador all over the world. Though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. In the course of justice, none of us will be saved. You follow? It's really heavy. We've all made mistakes. Right? Like Jesus said, let he who hath no fault cast the first stone. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. If you pray for the Lord to be merciful to you, then your prayer that the Lord should be merciful to you, or may the Lord be pleased to be merciful to you, is also an instruction to you to be merciful to other people. You follow how sophisticated this is? It's really beautiful. Compassion. Passion means suffer. The word passion entered the English language through the passion of the Christ. That's the original etymology of the term. It referred to the suffering of Christ on the cross. Compassion is to suffer with somebody. Not just to feel with them, but to suffer with them. It's the best of empathy. You know what they're going through. And it's also the best of sympathy because you do something to help them. It's generally considered to be the most developed emotion. There are some theorists, and I agree with them, who feel that compassion is really just love manifested towards someone who's suffering. There's different types of compassion. There's heroic compassion where you put yourself in harm's way. There's stranger compassion where you're compassionate towards somebody for just because they exist and you cross paths with them. There's different types of compassion that are delineated, that are spoken about. Pay attention. Stay awake. Get off of that. There you go. That's the first thing you should do for yourself. Instead of closing your eyes and falling asleep. You think, I'm just going to rest my eyes. You're falling asleep on me. Compassion is love manifested towards somebody who's suffering. Therefore, God's love for us manifests as compassion. Because we're below God and we're suffering from our own misdeeds. And therefore, God's love for us becomes compassion. It's the same basic principle. And so I think ultimately, pity, sympathy, empathy. These things are various manifestations of feeling, and they reach their ripened fruit in compassion, and that compassion becomes mercy when your compassion is for somebody below you who you are qualified to help. And of course, Krishna being omnipotent, his compassion becomes mercy or grace. Either we have mercy and Krishna has grace, or we have compassion and Krishna has mercy. Krishna speaks about grace as anukampa. Anukampa means to quiver for another, to feel for another. It's almost an exact translation from Sanskrit of the word compassion. Kripa is a standard term. Kripa is a standard term. K, R is a vowel, P-A. Kripa is a standard term for compassion. It comes from krip, which is a verbal root, which means to mourn or to pity or to feel for somebody. Very similar to the word mercy. Karuna. Karuna. It's another word for compassion. Comes from the verbal root kri or ku. There's kind of a mixed idea of where it comes from. It also has the idea of feeling behind it. So we have different words for compassion also in Sanskrit, but if you look at the etymology, they kind of have the same meaning as the words in English. To feel for someone, to suffer for someone, to feel sad. Krishna speaks about malpamyena, to feel for others by comparing it to how you would feel if it was done to you. Sarvabhuta iterata, he speaks about feeling, doing welfare work for other people, helping other people. He says if you help other people by teaching them the Gita, you do the greatest welfare work. You're the most dear to him. No one's ever been more dear. No one will ever be more dear. Krishna speaks of his own compassion, and that it leads him. Tesham evanukam partamahama jnanajam tamaha nashayam yatmabhavasta jnanadipena. It causes him to, within your heart, destroy the darkness of ignorance with the lamp of knowledge. When you open yourself up to that grace. I have spoke this much to mitigate the justice of thy plea. I have to mitigate, I have to curb your appeal to justice, because justice unseasoned by mercy becomes cruel and robotic and exacting and harsh. Justice and mercy, and the thing is, it's like justice and mercy, that's the core of religion. There has to be a logic, there has to be some reason, there has to be, when we defend, and this gets kind of complicated here. I'm just sort of like winging it and just kind of flowing. But this gets just slightly complicated, so please pay attention. Generally, we try to get Krishna out of trouble for evil in the world by saying that evil is our fault. We turned away from Krishna. That's our free will. Free will is a gift from God. Free will makes the world a better place because it allows for love, but it has to carry with it the possibility of us misusing free will, and therefore evil exists as a natural consequence of free will, which is the best universe possible, and an all-good and all-powerful God could and would create the best universe possible. And a universe without the possibility of evil is not the best universe possible, because it would be a universe without free will, and therefore without the possibility of love. And if you approach Krishna, he approaches you, and if you open the door, he comes in, and the Krishna is there for everybody at all times and all places. And in this way, we articulate an all-good and all-powerful deity is reasonable. But mercy carries this subjective, unfair, unreasonable level of munificence. Gratitude is this feeling you have when somebody does for you more than what you deserve. The nature of gratitude is you feel that what's been done for you is more than what you deserve. So really, that explanation, which gets Krishna out of hot water in a philosophical discussion, doesn't actually embody the essence of our tradition. The essence of our tradition is that Krishna is going the extra mile. Now, ultimately, you have to link that in some way to like you are opening the door for that. Or there's another way you can work around it, that love for Krishna is the possession of the devotees. And therefore, if the devotees are limited and they are able to give to one person but not somebody else, that's not a fault on the part of Krishna, because the devotees aren't omnipotent. isn't in charge of love of himself, which he wouldn't be because he's the object of love and he's not the possessor of love. So really the devotee is the possessor of love. The devotee is the giver of love, not Krishna. Then you can get out of the idea that devotees are limited in their ability to give. They want to give to everybody, but they might not be able to. And that allows for there to be some subjectivity, and some people get, some people don't. Another way to explain it away is those people must have in some way wanted that or opened the door for that. But the thing is, then that leaves aside this idea of like this tidal wave of mercy where what you got is so much more than what you wanted. And Krishna really capitalized and went the extra mile and put himself in harm's way. And this gets into this like idea of grace, which is built on a bedrock of philosophy, so you can escape things like the problem of evil or partial or arbitrary God or a God who plays favorites. But if you go too far with that, it becomes a robotic God who's always responsive and never active, who never takes a risk, who never takes a chance. And so you have to bounce back and forth because you don't want to come up with a conception of grace which is so faithful to logos that it doesn't become translogical. It's so faithful to justice and reason that it doesn't become translogical and transreasonable, and it doesn't become mercy and grace and like a tidal wave of love pouring down from above. And so there's this idea that grace is the finisher of mercy, grace is the finisher of justice. To mitigate the justice of that plea, because grace ultimately trumps justice. It mitigates, it curbs justice, because justice without mercy becomes cruel. Which if thou follow this strict court of Venice, must needs give sentence against the merchant there. So they're saying you're in the power, you're in the position to give judgment. And you're such a strict court, and so they're trying to appeal to the court. It's beautiful, isn't it? And I really feel like Shakespeare gets to the essence of things, and this idea of justice and mercy is at the core of many spiritual traditions, including our own. And you got to bounce back and forth, and they temper each other. Mercy without justice also becomes sentimental, and you end up with in a universe that's sort of anachronistic and doesn't make any sense, and so that's also problematic. And so usually in the later echelons of our tradition, you can start to drink from the cup of mercy without getting bewildered. You can foray into it. And usually in the beginning, we focus more on the justice and the logos and the logic of divinity, because that's all people can handle. All right, I think I'm done. I guess I'll just wrap it all up. I was introduced to this by my gurus. Not the whole thing, but just the beginning of it, and then it led me to read up more on it and learn more about it. And Shakespeare has a powerful voice. Once more into the breach, my friend. You know? It's like he's got all these, like from King Lear, he's got all these just powerful. Into the breach once more, dear friend, about going into battle. He was a very powerful thinker who really articulated the virtues of an entire culture. And I see corollaries with our own tradition. And so I read this. It's about mercy, trumping justice, seasoning justice, tempering justice, mitigating justice. Mercy is a divine quality. Mercy is a quality that teaches us as we pray for it, we also have to espouse it and we also have to practice it. I see those things in the Gita. I see the language of mercy is the same in both cultures. It's based on feeling for somebody, even suffering with somebody. Compassion, sympathy, empathy, they all carry with it. We've developed a language. The word empathy is only 100 years old in this country, 150 years old. We're developing a language. That language was also there in Sanskrit. In some ways, we have a more developed language in English. I like our language as well. I appreciate the fine nuances of our language as well. But I see the same threads there, the etymology and the way the term is used. And I'm of the opinion that love becomes mercy and compassion when someone's suffering. And therefore, if you don't have compassion for people, you don't actually love them. and that it's a gift, and it's a gift for you as well. And that we have to embody this as we become divine-like, and we have to ennoble ourselves and become virtuous and see the bigger picture and let go of like the lower exacting judicial side of things. And that's not going to make you weak, because you could still castrate the rapist and forgive them. Most of us are on a roll where we have to dispense justice. Usually that's taken care of by the courts. We can let go, and that gift is for us as well. Sometimes holding somebody accountable is your gift to them, to teach them a lesson. But you shouldn't be looking to be that judge and jury for everybody. Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada's Guru said, my job as Guru is to teach you and find fault with you and correct you. But why have you taken up such a job? With your God brothers. Like, why are you, like, you might have, that might happen at some point that that's your role, but why are you aspiring for that? We should think about these things. When I think about these things, I feel ennobled. I feel like they bring out the best in me as I contemplate these things. And the Four Regulative Principles is actually not this Victorian admonition against committing sin. It's freeing us up to pursue virtue. It's allowing for virtue to grow. And money is oftentimes fame, money, power. Those things are just as dangerous as the vices. If we want to be spiritualists, we have to actually be spiritualists. We have to make our virtue and our goal, the goal of our life, something more. And we have to spend our time pursuing that higher thing. We can still make a buck, turn a buck, no problem. But it can't be what you're about. And we're not even that anymore. We just want to appear like we're turning a buck. All hat, no cattle. All right. I think I'm done. Thank you very much, IGTV. Thank you very much.